It's going wonderful. This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com. And right now I have a guest that is kind of an expert on Texas wrestling. He's an author of four books, one on Lance Von Erich, the famous Von Erich. It wasn't a real Von Erich. Lance by Chance is the name of the book. Then he has two other short story books on wrestling that I'm sure we're going to get into more detail on as this podcast goes. And he's just finishing another book. It's out on Amazon now, but it's going to have its official release date soon. Black Bart, who's done an interview with me a few years ago, and this guy has some of the best stories ever. So maybe to start off, how did that book come about?
Well, that book, somebody, I reached out to a podcaster when I was promoting, I believe this book, my second short story book. And I reached out to a podcaster I had worked with previously, and he let me know that he wasn't doing a podcast at that time. However, he was, helping wrestlers promote and get gigs at shows and signings and stuff. And he said that he had run into Bart and wanted to know if that Bart was looking for a writer and wanted to know if I'd be interested in it. And I was really bogged down with projects, and I'm kind of careful about taking on too many projects at one time. So I said, hey man, I'm not going to be able to do this right now. Well, when I did, a few months later, when I got caught up, I reached back out to that gentleman who got me in touch with Bart, and he gave me Bart's number. The day I called Bart, the first thing, all I just said was, Bart, this is Vinny. And I was going to explain who I was. And he was like, Dadgum, Vinny, I've been waiting for you to call me. So before I really could agree to work on the project, we're working on the project. You know what I'm saying?
That's hilarious. So he was already aware of you and your work as an author. So that's great.
Yeah, the podcaster had told him about me. I guess he might have looked up some of my work. He wanted to, he was very interested. He was trying to get somebody to write for him for some time, and things just never panned out. And the opportunity just came my way, and like I said, when I got caught up, I was interested. It was a challenging project, though. I'll tell you that.
Challenging in what way?
Um, well, I mean, we interviewed probably up until the time it was printed. You know what I mean? I mean, really just kind of getting details from him, and he, one story leads to another story and leads to another story and leads to another story. It was like, hey, what story were we talking about?
Yeah, he's a hell of a storyteller. And one thing you were telling me that's interesting, his book actually picks up where the Lance Von Erich book ends. So for the people that really want to know the history, it just randomly did that.
Yeah, and you know what? It's very interesting. So, and I'll go into detail with that with you, Devin. So this book basically, it starts off. It starts building up. It talks about the Von Erich Freebird feud. All right, that was the really the pivotal thing, because you've had three Von Erichs, you had three Freebirds. Okay, David Von Erich passed away. Mike Von Erich wasn't ready for that type of a program, right? Fritz had this idea to bring in somebody. However, they found a non-wrestler. They had to send this guy to Portland, have him trained, right? And then I don't know when they had planned to bring him down, but when Mike Von Erich contracted the toxic shock syndrome in his shoulder, that's when they brought him down. And Lance even says at that time he wasn't quite ready. He goes into a year and a half that he's there. And in that year and a half, Gino Hernandez dies. The company goes to Israel for the first time, right? And or actually the second time. They had already gone to Israel because that Mike got injured in Israel. But they're traveling to Israel. They're they're Kerry Von Erich had his motorcycle accident, and then Wyatt Lance was there too. Mike Von Erich took his life. So you have all these things that happened, right, in the time. Well, Black Bart. So in Lance, he leaves in 1987, about April 87. Matter of fact, just like right after Mike Von Erich died, right? This book picks up in 1986 in World Class, right? It goes back to his career and how he got started, where he thought he was going to go into football and college football and stuff like that, but he got into wrestling. There's a chapter, I guess around chapter 20, it starts talking about World Class, and he was doing little hot shots for Fritz. He wanted to work for Fritz right off the bat, but Fritz was like, look, dude, that's not how it works, because he's from Fort Worth, Bart is. And he says, that's not how it works. You got to go out here, make a name, and come back. So anytime that he would come home to visit his family, Fritz would put him on the card. He'd wrestle somebody, whatever. In 1986, he calls Fritz, hey, I'm coming through town. You got a shot for me. Can I pick up a match? He puts him in a match with Mike Von Erich. And he's in this place in Louisiana, in this hot tin building, and it dawns on him that this was the Von Erich that had the toxic shock syndrome. He sees the scar, and he says to Rick Hazard, he goes, dude, isn't this the guy that was sick? And he says, yeah. And he goes, well, dude, it's 105 degrees or 10 degrees, whatever it was. He goes, if I'm suffering, how do you think this guy's feeling? He goes, well, the doctor cleared him to work. He goes, well, we're going home right now. And so it talks about that. But that book goes all the way up. I don't know if a lot of people know. After Kerry Von Erich was released from the WWF, he came back to Dallas. It was at that point, it was Global Force Wrestling, right? Bart was the last guy to have an angle with Kerry Von Erich. They were knee deep in an angle, and they were reviving the Dallas wrestling when Kerry died.
I did not know that. So he was there right at the very end when Carrie passed away. That's terrible.
Very terrible, very very sad. And he talks about how that news affected him. He wasn't Bart wasn't real close with the Von Erichs, but he had like a kinship with Kerry. He wrestled all the guys. And Bart talks about how the Von Erich boys, their dad owned the company, so they got the spot, right? And a lot of the wrestlers at that time really didn't think that they were deserving of that spot, that because they weren't, as the way Bart put it, we had to candy coat their career.
So as far as the movie goes, I understand you saw it last week. From all your research, obviously the movie didn't go according to what really happened. But what did you think about it overall, as a wrestling fan?
Well, I saw the movie twice. I've already seen it twice. I enjoyed the movie. It's a good movie. Some of the and it is. It says right in the very beginning, Devin. It says, the movie is inspired by a true story, right? And it is. And they put a lot into the movie, right? So when I say they put a lot into the movie, there's stuff like out of content or maybe out of order. And I'll give you an example of this. There's a match in the very beginning. I believe it's Chavo Guerrero Jr. is playing the Sheik, and we're talking about the Sheik from Detroit. The from Michigan, the Ed Fairhat, right? The original Sheik, not the Iron Sheik, right? So he's got a little camo on his wrestling trunks, and supposedly that match is supposed to be 1979. I noticed this the second time I watched it. There's a poster in the front row. Somebody has a sign that says Cosmic Cowboy. Okay. I couldn't believe I caught it today. I didn't see it the first time. It's a Cosmic Cowboy. If you know anything, the Von Erich brothers, when they, Kerry and Kevin, when they were feuding Gino Hernandez and Chris Adams in, what was it, 85? There was a hair match, and they shaved their heads and they wore the hoods, and they called themselves the Dynamic Duel. Well, they were dodging the Von Erich brothers, and one night, I think it was around Christmas time or right around a big event, they started wearing these masks, and they called themselves the Cosmic Cowboys. And when they came to the ring that night, they took the masks off. And of course, everybody knew they were the Von Erichs, right? But it was the story. And I saw that sign in there. And also, too, in that same match with the Sheik, Akbar, there was a guy dressed like Akbar in the robe and the Khalifi, and in my understanding, Akbar didn't come into world class until 1981, something like that. So I know he was in the Mid-South, but that was a little thing. He was a staple. He was a mainstay over there. And then there was an office shot that I noticed too. And I don't know what time frame it was in the movie, but there was a bald guy sitting in the office who could have very well been Gary Hart, right? To portray Gary Hart. Gary Hart had a big hand in that. So when I say they put a lot of stuff in there, there was a little things, but it's like they wanted to get as much world class stuff in there, even if it wasn't in the time frame of they were trying to tell the story.
And obviously, MJF was playing the role of Lance Von Erich in that, but it seems like that didn't quite make the movie. Were you disappointed to see that?
Well, you know what? I was not so much that I was. Well, you didn't even know who he was, right? If you didn't know that MJF was playing Lance, watching the movie, you wouldn't even know who that was. They never said, "Hey, Lance," or "In this corner, Lance and Kevin," or whatever. Very interesting thing about that segment, though, and I'll tell you my thoughts on it. Lance was a bodybuilder, right? What was MJF doing in this in his 5.5 to 7 second scene in the movie? He was doing a lot of posing, right? He did this and he did this and a lot of grandstanding. Well, I wonder if they did that for the movie, but that wasn't Lance's personality. Lance was not a wrestler, and he was very, in my book, Kevin calls him a mashed potato sandwich, meaning he had no pizzazz. He didn't have that flamboyancy. He wasn't real confident in the sense of, he was confident in his strength, right? But he wasn't a pro wrestler, and he wasn't really a showman. He did some acting, but this wrestling thing was not in his realm. So, I can't see Lance doing that bodybuilding stuff. That really wasn't his style. And another thing that interested me about that scene was that Kevin was insisting that Lance tagged him. Like, tag me. Like, Lance would not let Kevin into the match. And what's so funny is, in real life, those roles were reversed. The guy wanting to get in the ring was Lance, and the Von Erich brothers were, you know, taking all the action inside. That, Lance would get the heat, they would get the win. Or say, for example, there's a I when the prior to the network going to Peacock, you could find stuff pretty easy on there. And there was a 6-man tag team match. Kevin Von Erich, Mike Von Erich, and Lance. And Lance was in there for about 30 seconds. And they like Kevin Von Erich started it, or Mike started it, and then Lance was in there for a tad, and then Kevin and Mike were in there and in there, in there, in there. And so that was, to me, that wasn't really realistic, because the Von Erich brothers were the stars. They were getting the action. You know what I mean? So it did really portray Lance in such a way as he wasn't that showy, he wasn't that showboaty, and he was probably the one that was wanting to get into the ring. You know what I'm saying?
How do you think they portrayed Kevin overall as compared to how he really was at that time? Obviously, as far as the actor goes, I think the consensus is the guy that played Kevin probably should have played Carrie physique wise, but as far as personality wise, was that close to him? Was he fairly straight and narrow?
Well, I don't know if he was. I don't know if any of the wrestlers in that whole company were straight and narrow. But I will say this: I I thought the taking their bodies, you know, their body size, and even Carrie's body size. That guy, the actor Jeremy Allen White, aside from their bodies, I thought they were all the Von Erichs were spot on except Mike. Mike really, the guy that played Mike really didn't really meet my expectations for Mike. Mike was pretty quiet dude. One thing I did like about what was interesting about Mike, when I was working on the Lance Von Erich book, everybody I talked to said he wanted to work in the promotion, in the production. He wanted to work in like the cameras, and he wanted to work on the television side, right? And some people said band, that he was into music and stuff like that, but it was mostly television production that he wanted to do. In the Bart book, everyone said band, band, band. So it was, in the first book it was television production and a little bit of band. In the Bart research, it was all band and a little bit of television production. One thing I found very, very interesting was when they were having lunch outside, like a picnic lunch, and he was sitting by Kevin's girlfriend, and Carrie just came home from being told that he wasn't going to be in the Olympics, or go to the Olympics. He says, "Hey, are you seeing the show?" He said, "Yeah, the show looks great." He goes, and Mike says to him, he goes, "Yeah, what do you think about all those new camera angles?" I thought that was very interesting, because that was Mike. But Mike was very quiet. It kind of made him, like really outgoing. I didn't know him personally at all, but from what the guys tell me, he was nobody knew him. None of the wrestlers knew him because he was so quiet. But going back to your thing with Kevin, I thought the personality and the way he talked was spot on. And then I think the fact that the dynamics of the brothers and how Fritz was with the brothers, everybody expected Kevin to be the one. I mean, even when we were living up there, well, Kevin's the oldest. Why isn't he running for the title? And they put David in front of him, and they put Kerry in front of him, and yeah, I think that was dead on, man.
One of the things I heard Meltzer say that he didn't like about the movie was they didn't portray them to be as big as stars as they were. Like they made it seem like they were almost just stars in a local promotion, but like the girls in reality would be screaming like crazy to where people's ears would be ringing for hours after going to see them wrestle. What did you think about as far as how they were portrayed as stars?
Well, yeah, I mean, let's face it, those guys were the Beatles of Dallas, you know. And I'll give you an example, and I might have told you this once before, but we went to Six Flags. We just moved. I moved to Dallas area when I was about 10 or 11 years old. My dad took us to Six Flags, and I wasn't even watching wrestling at this time. And it was hot, you know, and it was crowded, and we had been waiting in this ride for, I don't know, it seemed like forever, but you know, when you're a kid, everything seems like forever, right? But it seemed like we were waiting a long time, and we were like in the end of the line. The line wasn't moving, and all of a sudden, everybody just dispersed. I mean, just whew. And me and my family just went up to the front of the ride, or the front of the where the, I guess, little cars were, or whatever it was, for the roller coaster or whatever it was. And we got in, and my dad said, "Hey, what the hell just happened?" And they said, "Well, the Von Erichs are over there." And you know, we found out that it was, I believe it was Kerry and Mike. Mike wasn't even wrestling; he was maybe still in high school. But my, you know, my point with that is that, wow, these guys were huge stars. You know, I waited hours and hours and hours to get a signature from Kerry after he won the world title, when he opened up a fitness gym in my hometown, you know, in Louisville, Texas. Waited hours and hours and hours and hours and never got it, you know. And so, you know, it was like a whole Saturday. So my point is, yeah, they might have played that down, but I mean, you know, like that scene when he met his girlfriend, or met Pam, his wife to be. There, you know, those guys, you couldn't get that close to them because there were so many people around them. You know what I mean? It was, they really had that Beatles thing to them. You know, that that stardom.
Yeah, I've heard that. When you were going to see Carrie and stuff, by that time, was it global or was it still world class championship wrestling?
It was world class.
What was your experience going to world class shows?
Oh man, it was. I mean, they were always packed. They were always packed, and you know, I went to the Sportatorium a couple of times, and I went to the Will Rogers a couple of times. But I went to a lot of the stadium shows. I went to the Texas Stadium. I've gone to the Cotton Bowl. I went to Reunion Arena. Those were, you know, that was really kind of like, you know, I could talk my parents into the big ones, right? It was like, you know, being 14 years old, I couldn't drive to these things, and so, you know, they weren't taking me to wrestling every week because it was on TV every week, right? So, you know, I could talk them into the big ones and get down there, but they were always huge. I mean, there were big crowds. It wasn't until, like, you know, the very end where you started to see the drop off, right? And I think for me, what I saw was when Fritz pulled out of the NWA in 1986. That's when I saw a difference in the product, right? I think it watered down world class, and they called themselves World Class Wrestling Association or something like that. What was interesting in that movie in 1986 when Ric Flair came in, well, Ric Flair, that belt that Ric Flair had, that was like the WCW belt. That wasn't the NWA belt. Well, that belt I don't believe that belt ever came to Dallas. Not then. So that was a little off. There was times like off. Also in the movie, it made it look like David Von Erich made his debut in 1979. Well, he made his debut in 1977. That was off. And also too, it appeared in the movie uh, that, well, Kevin got married in 1980, right? Well, at the wedding, he discovers that David is sick, and he goes, "Well, I'm going to Japan next week." Well, he died in 1984. And another big thing was when Kerry won the world title in the movie, he tells Kevin, he goes, "Hey man, I can't come down. I can't, I'm still riding high on this match, right? I'm going to go for a motorcycle ride." Well, he didn't have his motorcycle accident that night, but in the movie, it appears that way, you know? So,
Yeah, what I didn't like about that motorcycle ride after the match was, weren't they traveling 7 days a week at that time? The last thing you'd want to do if you had some time off is drive somewhere, you would think.
you know, I don't know about the, I mean, I know those guys like to, I mean, from what I heard, Kerry liked his motorcycle, David liked riding horses, I mean, imagine they do whatever they, it's kind of, some of the guys liked fishing, a lot of those guys did that. So, I mean, I guess they had to do something, right? You know?
Yes, and someone's asking here if the WWC did not have their issues, and I'm guessing the sad Von Erich family issues, do you think they would have been able to stick around and compete with the WWE?
That's really hard to say. A lot of people, Bart included, he will say, had David survived, there'd still be Dallas wrestling, like an offshoot of world class here, right? That wrestling would be stronger than what it is here, which is right now it's pretty strong with all the independent. But and then there's guys like Eric Embry. He says no, that would have never happened. So we never know. I mean, it's really hard to say. One would hope we would like to say, oh yeah, wrestling would have been, but supposedly, when I uncovered some stuff from David Manning, it was like, Fritz had an opportunity to take the big piece of the cake, and he didn't think that the boys were ready for that, that he thought that they were ready for Texas, but he didn't think they were ready for the world in that regard. And so, Vince McMahon felt like he was ready to the world, and he took the cake instead. But I think Fritz had a very good opportunity to make claim to a stronger future. You know what I mean?
They made a small reference about the Von Erichs being disliked in Missouri during this with Kevin and his wife in a scene. I understand they were very popular in Missouri as far as draws, getting some huge houses. Was that one of their most popular states other than Texas?
Well, they went there a lot. They because I know they wrestled there a lot, and I've talked to Sam. Uh, oh my gosh, well his name her. Oh my gosh, Herb. You know who I'm talking about, Herb?
Yes, Herb
Okay,
Simmons, who
Herb
used to work
Simmons. Oh,
with Larry Mazadek or something.
yes. Okay. Yes. So I spoke with him, and he was talking about some of the Von Erichs being in the St. Louis Hall of Fame, and I believe Kerry and Kevin, maybe David, Fritz, they spent the most time there. I don't know if they were disliked there or not. I mean, I didn't get that wrestling when I was a kid. These guys were pretty popular everywhere that they went. I when he said that to his wife at the barbecue place in the movie, I kind of thought that he said that because Harley was from Missouri, and Harley was, I mean, I think they loved Harley there, you know. So I think maybe he might have been meaning that, you know, maybe he wasn't too popular because Harley was from there. But I don't know that for a fact. You know, I don't know. To me, those guys were, they were well over in Texas, right, and other places. Matter of fact, other than Texas, you know, one of the states that I mean, my book sold very, very, very well, like in New England, like Connecticut and Massachusetts and places like that. New Hampshire. I couldn't believe how many books I sold up there. So the boys were popular across the country, in my opinion.
As far as David's death, do you have any insights as far as what happened with that death?
Well, you know, I've never seen the death certificate. You know, David Manning. I mean, you know, when he the way he explained the story to me was when Fritz was asking him, you know, what do we tell the people? And he says, we tell them whatever the autopsy says. We tell them whatever, you know, whatever came out on the autopsy. And what came out on the autopsy was the intestine. You know, the you've had Wild Bill Irwin. I've had Wild Bill Irwin on my show, and you know, that day he was in Japan, and supposedly he ate and he ate and he ate and he ate and he ate, and also too, you know, one thing I never heard was that David purged, right? I never heard that, but that's what Bill Irwin said. He said that he purged, so he eat and he'd go throw up and he'd go eat and do it again, and you know, if after you do that so many times, I mean, you know, the muscles in your throat or your stomach, they can't. Things probably are. I'm not a doctor, man, but I could just imagine the stuff might not work the same. And if that's the case, and he ate as much as he did, and he was drinking as much as Bill says he was, and he regurgitated and maybe choked on his vomit. I don't know, but supposedly a lot of food came out of his throat when they saw him in the hotel.
What did you think about the Bruiser Brody character in the movie? Not that there was a lot of lines, but as far as the casting.
He looked a little wider, right? He to me he didn't look as. I mean he fit the bill, right? He wore the boots, he had the hair and the beard. Um, you know, it kind of sounded like him to me. But to me, he looked a little more thicker. I Frank was a big dude, you know, but he was that guy looked more like a tank to me, right? The actor did. He looked, you know, stout, right? But Frank was big and tall, you know, like he had a slender build, but he, I didn't, you know, he had that body that you didn't want to mess with, you know. Hey, it was close.
Is it true that Brody actually quit booking the territory after Chris passed away?
I don't know if it was right after Chris passed away. Chris passed away. Are we talking Chris Von Erich or Chris Adams?
Chris Von Erich, the
Okay.
one that they cut out of the movie.
Yeah. Okay. Well, he died in 1991. Chris did. So, and Bruiser Brody died in 1987.
Oh, 1998.
88.
Okay, yeah.
88.
Oh, maybe it was Mike. I read somewhere that that the deaths were getting too much for him, but That may have definitely been something false that I read now that you put it that way. What can
And
you tell us about Chris?
not not much. I mean, um, me and him were about the same age. He was at the Texas Stadium show. He was in a lot of pictures. He was probably about 14 or 15 years old. His young teens. He was never very tall. When he was an adolescent, he was kind of chubby. Like most kids at that age, right? Because they're growing and but when he started wrestling, he he muscled up, but he was never tall. He looked to me like a and not as far as the so much as the build. He was stocky, right? And he had hair like Carrie. He was almost like a mini Carrie, but nobody could compare to Carrie's body. I mean, I've talked to so many wrestlers, and they all tell me that, as far as pro wrestling goes, Carrie had probably one of the better bodies, if not the best body in professional wrestling. I've heard that time and time and time and time again, so you can't really compare. But, a lot of the guys that wrestled with Chris when he did wrestle, uh, Bart says that they all had to take it easy on him. Bart never wrestled him, but he said all the guys, they had to take it easy on him. That it wasn't, they couldn't go all out with him. You know,
Is it true that Chris was the best amateur wrestler? One of the fans is asking.
I don't know. I've never heard that. In the only I've heard stories of Kerry and his amateur career, and but I've never heard that about Chris.
How was Kerry as an amateur? I didn't even know he amateur wrestled.
He was, the story that I got was, and I got this from David Manning. It was a good little story. There was some kind of a wrestling event, and David Manning was like a referee at this event. And at those events you got mats, right? Mats everywhere. And Kerry was in a match, and David Manning happened to be refereeing. And I don't know how old Kerry was. I would say that probably like a young teenager, maybe going back to early teens again, right? And David Manning was refereeing this match. Kerry lost the match, and after the match, David Manning went over there and kind of gave him some pointers of what he could have done better next time. He just spent a little time with him, and how the story goes is, next time do it like this. You might want to try this, whatever. So Fritz, being at the event, saw this and went to the concession and said, "Hey, whatever that guy wants, it's on me." And so later that day, David Manning went to the concession stand to get something to eat, and he went to order something. He goes, "Oh, it's Jack Atkinson bought it," and he was like, "Who's? I don't know who that is." And the lady told him, it's Fritz von Erich." Well, he knew who Fritz von Erich was, and then supposedly, I guess about a week or two later, he got a call, and Fritz hired David Manning to like amateur coach the boys, to help them with their wrestling. And he became Kerry's, because he called Fritz out to the house, or Fritz called David Manning out to the house, and he goes, "Hey, do you remember my boy?" And he goes, "No, I don't remember. No, I don't know what boy you're talking about." Of course, he's working with a lot of kids, right? David Manning at these tournaments, and he calls Kerry out. And he goes, "Kerry, come out here." And sure enough, David's like, "Yeah, I remember this kid." So he that's how David Manning got into the fold with the Von Erichs.
How were the Von Erichs as football players overall? Is there one of them that stood out better than the others?
Not that I mean, I heard that Kevin uh, had an opportunity to play at UNT. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if he played college ball up there or if he went up there, outside of wrestling. I know the boys were very athletic, and I also know some people that went to high school with them in Lake Dallas, and they were very athletic, and that athletics were what they did, But as far as them being standouts in football, I don't know that.
What was your personal greatest memory of world-class championship wrestling from when you were growing up watching it as it was happening?
It would probably have to be when Kerry won the world title at Texas Stadium, and when he took the belt off Ric Flair.
I understand that Doris was actually there celebrating with the family, and in the movie they kind of made it seem like she didn't care, but it was a whole kind of Texas victory thing, right, that night.
Right, right. Yeah, in the movie, she's at home watching it. Well, she wasn't watching it live that day because it wasn't live. They showed it like a week or two later, right, on the show. But yes, she was at the stadium. There's many pictures that document her being there. Chris was there. The whole family was there, and that was a big deal. One thing I do want to point out what I thought was very interesting was in my Lance by Chance Wrestling as a Von Erich book. You know, at Mike's funeral, um, Lance talks in detail about what happened that day at the funeral. Lance was asked a day or two before the funeral was, hey, you're going to, you need to go to the funeral. And he wasn't planning to go, wasn't close with Mike. And when he got to the funeral, uh, they came up to him and said, hey, you need to go back. You know, it's very common for, before the ceremony for the family to be off in a little room with the body of the deceased, right? Open casket, and Mike was in there, and the family was in there, and they pulled Kevin in there, or well, Kevin Vaughn, right? They pulled Lance in there, Lance Von Erich, and pulled him there in the room, and in the book he talks about that, and he talks about how uncomfortable it was, and he talks about how still at that time that Fritz is doing the kayfabe, doing the Von Erich, doing the wrestling thing when he's at his son's funeral, and he's still trying to get people to believe that Lance Von Erich is a Von Erich by sitting with the family in the front rows of the church. Very interesting.
And of course, the one thing from Lance that makes a lot of sense is when he talks about when he left the territory, he really didn't do much more in wrestling. And by Fritz going out there and making the video denouncing him as a Von Erich, it only brought attention to something that a lot of people would never have known otherwise, or not known till decades later.
Right. Of not being a Von Erich, right? And right. Yeah, the way Lance says, he could have just rode off into the sunset, right? But Fritz wanted to make a big deal. He felt like Fritz was kind of doing that to put I guess to, I don't know, put him in a bad light. I don't know what his thinking was, but to me, and Lance talks about it, he kind of felt like he was blackballed in a sense, right? He couldn't use the Von Erich name in the states, Even when he wrestled in Puerto Rico after that, he wrestled as Fabulous Lance. He wrestled a few times with Ken Mantell's promotion, as Fabulous Lance. But he went to South Africa and wrestled in other countries off and on for up until the early 90s, like 93, 94, as Lance Von Erich. So he didn't do much of wrestling in the States, but he, man, he had quite the career over there in Durban and South Africa, and he had some shows in India, and they loved him over there.
As far as how Fritz was portrayed in the movie, how do you think that was compared to how he was in real life from your research?
Well, from my research, I would say it was pretty close. I did see the article that Kevin came out and said that it was a movie and he was a great guy. And I mean, I didn't know Fritz personally. I've met Fritz a few times. He, in his later years, in the very last few years of his life, he wasn't real sociable. He wasn't a really outgoing guy. I mean, by this time he had lost five of his boys, and he's probably very sad, and but from what I heard, yeah, I mean, I thought the portrayal was pretty spot on. He was gruff, he was determined, he was set in his ways, and yeah, he wanted the best for his boys, and he wanted them all to wrestle, you know, and the one I've heard people say that none of the boys wanted to wrestle except David. I don't know if that's true. I from what I've researched, Mike did not want anything to do with wrestling. I know Chris did.
What do you think about Kevin now appearing recently on the Texas AEW and Ring of Honor events with Ross and Marshall?
Yeah, you know what? I think that this movie for Kevin's family, I think it's long overdue, and I think I love seeing Kevin. I've always liked Kevin, and Kevin, when I was younger, you know, Kevin and his brother, I've met. I met Kevin and his wife at the restaurants. They'd come in. The Ross and Marshall were very young. They'd come in the mid-afternoon. They'd sit in this back room at this restaurant I worked at in Louisville. I remember one Christmas. It was the day before Christmas, and I had opened the restaurant. I was a manager of this restaurant, and I had opened it. We had no customers, maybe one customer in the morning. I can't remember, but everyone was, the rest of the staff or the other owners or managers were not feeling well. So I had called the owner of the place and just said, hey, it's noon or 1. I'm going to just close the restaurant, and I'm just going to lock up and send the guys in the back home, and we'll just open up after Christmas. And as I was locking the door, Kerry Von Erich was pulling on the door, and I was amateur boxing at the time. I was probably 135 pounds, 140 pounds. And Kerry said to me, and this had to be early 90s, so 90, 91, and probably 90. And he said, hey, are you guys closed? And I said, well, yeah, I was going to go ahead and lock up. He goes, well, do you think me and my brother could still eat? And I said, yeah, why not? Man, they probably stayed for about an hour and a half. Those guys had some appetites, man, and very nice. And I remember when they were leaving, I was talking to Kevin. Well, it's only me and Kevin and Kerry in the whole place besides the cooks, right? I remember they were looking at my boxing picture, and I had an article on the wall. And Kerry, I remember he goes, he goes, "That's you?" And I said, "Yeah, that's me." And Kerry took his hand, and I remember he kind of like slapped my chest, and he goes, "Oh man, you've got some muscle to you." I didn't have much muscle, dude. I was like 140 pounds, but I was cut, and I lifted a lot of weights and stuff like that. But I was nothing like Kerry, right? And this guy's hating me, kind of like I'm the size of him. He's could easily put his hand through my chest. But they were very nice guys, very nice guys. And Carrie, I've met Carrie, a few times like that, like in passing at the gas station and stuff. Very jovial, very outgoing, very friendly. Just a um, nice guy. And Kevin's always been nice too. You know.
When you see Kerry Von Erich at a gas station in Texas and it's the early 90s and he's fresh off WWE TV or still in WWE, is everyone staring at him? What's like the reaction when they're seeing him pumping gas?
They would just, "Hey, Carrie," like, it's like you felt like you knew him, you know. And what was so unique about living up there in that area where they were is I didn't I didn't I'm I mean I'll make this clear. I didn't know the Von Erich family, right? I mean, I've seen them, and I didn't, you know, wasn't going to their house. They didn't know my name. They didn't know my last name. They didn't know my dog's name. They nothing. but but what I want you to get, the point I want to get across is when something happened to that family, like Mike's death, or Carrie's motorcycle accident, or Carrie's death, or Chris's death, David's death. I mean, it was like it happened to us, and not just me and my family, but the families of the people I worked with, and the families that came to the restaurants where I worked, and the community. The community, is like, my town was 10 miles from where the Von Erichs grew up, right? I mean, so running into them or going to school and someone saying, "Oh, I had a Kevin Von Erich sighting." "Oh, really? That's interesting." "Oh, I saw Fritz." "Oh, okay, cool." "Oh, I saw David at the diner." I mean, that stuff was common, but when they died, I mean, it was sad. And you'd go uh, to work and people would say, "Hey, man, did you hear about David today?" I was like, "Yeah, man, I can't believe it. And it was coming from non-wrestling people, you know and so what, you know they were ours. The North Texas loved, not just North Texas, but Texas loved the Von Erichs, man. And I'm telling you, they say Von Erich country, but it was for real.
One thing I heard that was downplayed greatly in the movie was David's death, almost as if it was a small thing, where in reality there was like 7,000 people at the funeral and kids in malls were crying, and it ended up after a day or so being front page news. I understand.
Oh, there's a big write up, and yeah, it was big. I mean, there was a lot of. I remember like getting the newspaper, and it was like, a lot of pictures and several pages, and I remember it being a very long article. And there was one scene in that movie that, and I believe it was after David died, where it was, a matter of fact, it was like a sky shot, and it was the limos, and they showed all these people surround on the street standing. Um, that was close, but I believe there was more. I believe there was more people in it. That was a good example. Uh, you know what I mean? That was a good example of how loved they were. But um, I a lot of people came out to that funeral. It was, even, when Lance said too, at Mike's funeral, there was a lot of people there. A lot of people hanging out. He couldn't believe how many people were outside of the place where they went for the ceremony. Lines and lines of people. So
Well, hopefully Ross and Marshall can kind of reignite things in AEW and get the family name going again because they're definitely beloved. And as far as your Wrestleville books, we haven't really talked much about those. For fans interested in those two books, what could they expect?
Well, these are short stories that I did when I was writing for my website, russellville.com. When I started the podcast in 2021, I pretty much put a stop to the short stories because I started writing books as well. But in the first volume, there's stories, and I'll just read some of the names on the table of contents. Tim Storm is in here. Damian Wayne is in here. There's a story of Tracy Smothers, Super Mex, Sean Hernandez, Mike Rapata, Chase Owens, Ricky Morton, Harley Race, Larry Henning, Bushwhacker Luke is in here, Barrett Brown, Bruce Thorpe, and this book covers, a lot of those stories were done in 2017, and it pretty much goes up to the end of Bruce Thorpe's run in the NWA. There's a lot of NWA champions in here. There's a lot of pictures in this book. There's 35 short stories in this book. And, you got veterans and you got up and coming people. You got some people that you may never, that you may never heard of that been on the independent scene for 15, 20 years. The volume 2 to that book, it probably could have been one book, but I didn't want a book that had over 400 pages in it, and so I split up the stories. This one has Jazz, Kamala. It has Scott Casey, Bobby Eaton, Thunder Rosa's in this book. PJ Black is in this book. This is this young lady right here is Nikita Knight, who is Thea Hale on NXT. This is Bryce Bordeaux. He was a wrestling podcaster and announcer. Now he's doing a lot of MMA. You got Jeremiah Plunkett and Kerry Morton's in this book. And Mario Mancini's in here. I've got Lalani Kai. Sal Renaro's in this book. RGA City. Kobe Carino. There's so many people that, if you're not into big long stories, then short stories. I always wanted to do a book of short stories, and when that website went away, I wanted to preserve those stories. So I put them in these books, and they're easy reads. They kind of take you in the life of these people, and it gives these wrestlers a platform and a spot that when you pick this book up in 15, 20 years, it was like, oh, man, I remember Dante Smiley. He wrestled in NWA. I remember Kerry Morton or Kamala. And, you got a little piece of these people in this book. And they talk about, how some of their struggles, some of their triumphs, some of the things they dealt with in their career or in their life, and some of the people that inspired them. And I think they're really, they make great gifts, and they're definitely stories that warm your heart.
And Bryce Bordeaux has also done some interviews for me on this channel back when he was doing wrestling announcing and interviewing. Great guy, and he's having great success
Oh
with
yeah.
MMA now. How's Black Bart's health doing? Because the last I heard, he wasn't doing very well.
Well, Black Bart is fighting cancer, and he is, he has his good days and his bad days, and he's going through some surgeries. So I spoke to him just a couple days ago, and he was, if he's having a bad day, you really got to kind of pry it out of him, because he's, his faith in God is strong. His attitude is usually very, very high. It's good, And so I'll be talking to him about 15 minutes, and then he'll say, "Hey, brother, I got to get off the phone. I'm not feeling great." But you would have never known that if he didn't tell you. So, his health is touch and go. He's fighting it. The dude is tough. In my doing my research on him and all the people that I've talked to, this dude was his wrestling career was uh, wow. The role that he played in this business is very commendable. And I found out a lot of stuff that I didn't know about him. There's a story in this book that I think people will find very interesting. I'll share it with you, Devin. In 1988, in July of 1988, he gets a call from Bruiser Brody, and uh, he says, "Hey, I need you to go to Austria to wrestle Otto Vance for his world title over there, because I have to stay in Puerto Rico a little longer than what I expected. And I need to cover this match. I can't no-show it, right?" So Brody smooths it out with Fritz or whatever. Bart makes a phone call to Germany or to Austria, and gets all the information he needs. He flies over there. He's over there for a week. Guy pays him what, $3,000 for one match, and then in the match he bleeds, and Otto thought he was really, really hurt, and ended up giving him a bonus. He made $5,000 for the match on top of, two extra, right? He comes back, and 2 days later, he finds out that, he wrestles on a Friday and finds out like 2 days later that Bruiser Brody was stabbed in Puerto Rico. And boy, that was a gut punch. The story that he shared. He shares a story about Necro Butcher. I don't know if you know, Necro Butcher had a small part in the Wrestler movie with Mickey Rourke. Well, Black Bart trained him. If you know, Black Bart is old school to the core. This guy is hardcore. And there's a very interesting story of those two, and how that relationship, that friendship didn't work out, So I think people are going to find out some things. It covers Lord of the Rings in here. It covers Mid-Atlantic. He talks about his friendship with Dick Murdoch. He talks about Ted DiBiase. He talks about how big of a star Junkyard Dog was. It goes in detail about the Von Erichs and what it was like working for Fritz. Fritz calls. There's a story with him and Kevin Von Erich. Kevin Von Erich, one of the biggest complaints that the wrestlers had with the Von Erichs was they didn't sell, right? And they just come back. And so one night he's supposed to hit Kevin with his branding iron, and Kevin says to him, he goes, "You didn't hurt me with that thing." So he hits him again, and he goes, "Yeah, hey man, you can't hurt me with that." And Bart swung back as hard as he could with that branding iron, connected with his head, and dropped Kevin. And Rick Hazard's like, "What the hell did you just do?" And he goes, "Hey, needs to learn how to sell," or whatever. He gets home. As soon as he walks in the door, his phone's ringing. He answers, "Hey, it's Fritz." He goes, "What the hell are you trying to do? You trying to kill my boy?" Hey, man. He tells Fritz, "Hey, if you would have whooped their asses a long time ago, you wouldn't have any problems with them today." So, Bart is a straight shooter, man. And I think people are going to see his humor in this book. They're going to see his integrity in this book, and he kind of draws the line in the sand, and I don't know. I enjoyed working on this project with him, but it was challenging. It was challenging because he has a 30-year career, and he went to some of these places more than once. So trying to get the time frame and everything, which is my thing, right? It's important to me. It was hard. It was hard to match all that stuff up, but we did it.
Well, you seem very enthusiastic about it, and it sounds like there's some great stories in there. And I guess if people go to wrestleville.com, they could get all the links for buying it, I suppose.
Absolutely. We got the store on there. You can see, yeah, we have, they can click on the store link. It'll take you to all the books that are offered there. Right now, the book is on Amazon.com, and you can get the Black Bar book there. You can get all my books on Amazon or at Russellville.com. And of course, please check out my podcast. I have interviews. I usually put 2 up there a week, and you got some legends up there, and you've got some up and coming. I've got a lot of good wrestling interviews coming this month. So, keep an eye out for that, and, like, subscribe, share, and yeah, definitely find me on Facebook, Vincent Berry, and let me know. Let me know what you think. Russellville has a page on there too. Leave some comments and some messages, and we're really good about getting back with the fans and the listeners and the readers.
Very good. And to close this off, would you recommend this Von Erich Iron Claw movie to wrestling
Yes,
fans?
yeah, absolutely. I might even go see this movie again. I enjoyed the movie. I think the problem with the movie is, listen, you know how Netflix is doing these 10 episode series or something? That's what you need for this. You need a 10 episode, a 16 episode series on this family and on this wrestling company to really tell the story, you know, not to leave anything out. And even if you had all that time, I don't know if you could still scratch the surface, right? It's a great story, I think, for the fan. I went with my sister-in-laws, and they loved the movie, right? They don't know wrestling like I do, but they they grew up in North Texas too. They know who the Von Erichs are. They know the wrestling. They don't know it like I do. They enjoyed it, right? But when I'm in there and I'm watching it, I'm the timeline is off, man. I mean, it's like I'm just like I'm watching it as like in the movie uh, when Kevin Von Erich wrestled Ric Flair. Well, that was 1986. They showed 1986 in that movie, and Mike had already died in the movie, but Mike didn't die until like April of '87. So it was little things like that for me, for like if you got purist, like I'm sure Meltzer knew all the history. Bill Apter, he knew all the history. I get it. For the guys that know those dates and everything that happened, maybe it wasn't that much fun. But if I look at it like that, it's not. It can't be that much fun for me either, because I was like picking. I told you about the sign and Akbar and all that stuff. But I mean, yeah, go see the movie. It's based on a true story. It's a great story. It's a feel good story. It's golly, man. You think about 5 brothers that died. You got one that's alive. You really put yourself in his shoes and think, wow. He says in the movie, he goes, man, and I've heard him in interviews too. He goes, man, I had 5 brothers, and I have no brothers. I don't know if I can't imagine that. I lost a sister, but I haven't lost 5 brothers. I haven't lost 5 siblings. So, I mean, I can't fathom that, man. And I think that this movie will really put you in his shoes, so to speak, and You know, I'm really glad to see Kevin getting out there more because, you know, I don't know if the Von Erich family has gotten, you know, the credit that they deserve, you know, for wrestling, you know, and this movie should have been done a long time ago.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews.